Meeting open session to order, and first order of business is roll call.
David Miller.
Present.
Margaret Brown.
Good morning.
Frank Ruffino. Fiona Moss.
Good morning.
Melissa Middleton.
Good morning.
Jason Perez.
Good morning. Here.
Shonda Wesley.
Present.
Shonda Wesley.
Present.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Present.
Good morning, all.
Okay. Looks like item 2 is approval of the June 17th, 2020 Risk and Audit Committee timed agenda.
Move approval.
I'll second.
Moved by Ms. Brown, second by Mr. Perez.
Margaret Brown.
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Moss.
Aye.
Lisa Middleton.
Aye.
Jason Perez.
Aye.
Shonda Wesley.
Aye.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the next order of business is the executive report. And for that, I'll call on Marlene Timberlake Diadamo.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Great, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, Committee, and Board members. Marlene Timberlake Diadamo, CalPERS team member. First, a bit of housekeeping. I would like to point out that attachment 3 for agenda item 7A has the heading of 5E, but it actually should say 7A. Today, we will present 2 audit plans, the 2021 Office of Audit Services Plan and the Independent Auditor's Plan. Both are action items requiring the committee's approval. The audit plan covers CalPERS audits and activities to be performed in fiscal year 2021. The independent financial statement auditor will present its annual audit plan, providing information on its approach, scope, objectives, and deliverables. At the conclusion of the audit, the independent auditor will report the results of the audit and express opinions on the respective financial statements of the fiduciary and proprietary activities at the November 2020 Risk and Audit Committee meeting. On information, we have 2 agenda items. First would be the Enterprise Compliance Status Report. This item is normally a consent item, but this month we wanted to bring this to the committee for a discussion of our personal trading program, which is attachment 3. This will include the status of compliance activity for the period of April and May, and will provide the supplemental information on the personal trading program. Second, we have the annual compliance report. This is annual information item which highlights compliance activities during fiscal year 2019-2020. The next Risk and Audit Committee meeting is scheduled for November 18th, 2020. It includes the Independent Auditor's Report for fiscal years 19-20, a review of the Independent Auditor's Management Letter, the Independent Financial Statement Auditor selection, and third-party valuation and certification of the 2019 annual valuations of the Judges Retirement System, Judges Retirement System 2, Legislators Retirement System, and the 1959 Survivor Benefit Program, and the Enterprise Risk Framework Review. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This concludes my report, and I would be happy to take any questions.
I'm not seeing any requests or any questions on my screen here. So that brings us to item 4, action consent items, approval of the April 21st, 2020 Risk and Audit Committee meeting minutes. And
Move approval.
Second.
okay, moved and seconded. And I'm not hearing Pam.
Oh, hold on. Margaret Brown,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
Aye.
Shonda Wesley,
Aye.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Aye.
All ayes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we move on to number 5, information consent items. I don't see any requests to pull anything here. So looks like we will move on to action agenda items, starting with 6A, Office of Audit Services Plan. I'll call on Belize Chapuis for that.
Hi, Belize. You should be able to turn on your audio and video.
Okay, I thought I did. Thank you. Good morning. Volume okay?
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Belize Chapuis, Office of Audit Services. Agenda item 6A is an action item. Staff is requesting the Risk and Audit Committee to approve the Office of Audit Services proposed audit plan for the fiscal year 2021. As required by the internal auditing standards, the Office of Audit Services prepared the risk-based audit plan to determine the priorities of the internal audit activity for the next fiscal year. In conducting the risk assessment, the Office of Audit Services, as the third line of defense, coordinated its efforts with the second line of defense, Enterprise Compliance Division, and Enterprise Risk Management Division. We interviewed CalPERS executive and senior management teams and sought input from the board members through surveys. Staff also incorporated information from prior internal and external audits. The Office of Audit Services has 2 audit programs, internal audits and employer compliance reviews. In identifying internal audit assignments and activities, staff evaluated multiple risk factors such as impact on the organization's strategic goals, changes in the operations and regulations, and internal controls. The Office of Audit Services also allocated resources to consulting engagements, special projects, and activities related to contracted and external audits and reviews. For the employer compliance reviews, the Office of Audit Services will continue to perform cycle reviews during the fiscal year 2021, covering 1 compliance area per cycle. This year will remain flexible to accommodate the employer's availability to conduct our reviews due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We're going to strive to complete 4 review cycles as we have done in the previous years. However, our travel and on-site work may be limited due to employers' availability, which may impact our workload. As required by the internal auditing standards, we'll remain responsive to the changes in the organization's operations and programs, and we will review and update the audit plan for the fiscal year 2021 as necessary. Any modification to the audit plan will be communicated to the committee through the quarterly status reports. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions for you here, Belize, but I do want to go back to Margaret, who had a comment on a prior item. Looks like item 5C. Margaret?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, I forgot, I'm trying to get all my notes together. 5C, which is the quarterly status report. I really want to thank the staff for providing that little table that shows audits outstanding findings outstanding that haven't been resolved for more than a year. I think that's very helpful for me to see those, and I assume we'll get those quarterly until those are resolved. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great.
For your request, yes.
Right. And then anything that's on the internal audit, which are confidential, we would see that status report in closed session. Is that correct? In the closed session materials, right?
If there's anything over a year old, correct, yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, I want to thank you. I know I've been a little persistent on this matter, but it's the only way we can see what's going on. I did have a question. How do you choose which local agencies or school districts will get the audit? Is it randomized or is it based on maybe a number of errors in the past?
Correct, risk-based, yes. So we,
Risk-based. Okay, good.
for every review cycle that we define the objective and scope for, we request the BI data from our IT folks, and we analyze the data. And we also, like you said, incorporate the prior findings as well into the selection of those agencies that we want to review for the cycle.
Are any of the audits random, completely random, or no?
No.
Okay, that way we're not wasting your time. I appreciate that. And then, Mr. Chair, I'll get in the queue for a question on 6A.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't see anyone ahead of you in the queue for 6A, so why don't you just ask your 6A question, and then I have Lynn Paquin next as well.
Great. So my question or hopefully comment about the audit plan that we're going to review or approve today, hopefully, is I just want to make sure that everybody understands that all the CalPERS internal audits are kept secret. They're in closed session because they're attorney-client work product or some other reason. And I've had a heck of a time getting the chair to discuss high-risk audits in closed session. I sent you an email and I couldn't get the IT security one to be discussed in closed session. So I think maybe the simpler way would be to ask the committee to agree to amend this audit plan to include that all audits are agendized on the consent calendar of closed session. So they're just there in closed session on the consent. And then if a committee member wants an audit pulled to discuss, it's simple to do. And that would be, I guess, I don't know if that's an alternative motion or how we would do that, maybe just by consent of the committee. But that way, I don't have to, try and get everybody's attention to discuss something I consider very, very concerning and high risk.
This is Matt Jacobs. I don't think that is properly agendized for discussion. So the question would not be, can we make that determination or decision today? The question would be whether the committee wants to agendize that for a future meeting.
Can we not amend the audit plan to include that all internal audits are placed on the closed session agenda? Why can't we just include it in the audit plan?
It's not been properly agendized as a prospective amendment to the audit plan. And the audit plan is just presented as the plan. You can comment about or decide that certain things ought not be on the plan, or that certain additional matters should be audited. But this kind of thing is kind of outside the scope of what could be amended into the plan.
Well, I would disagree that the result.
It's a procedural matter for the governance of either the Risk and Audit Committee or the Board Governance Committee.
Well, maybe the committee would like to take that up at another time at the next meeting. But I'd like to see these internal audits get put on the closed session agenda, just on the consent, so we could talk about them. Thank you.
Okay, I have Ms. Paquin with a question on 6A.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question about the external vendor audit of the private equity service provider, and I was just hoping to get a little bit more information about that. Is this the vendor that provides the breakdown of the fees?
Let me open up the plan. Hold on 1 second. It is on page, Could you help me locate it? It's under investment. Hold on.
I'm sorry. Let me see if I can find that page.
I assume it's under investment office, correct?
Yes, yes, it is.
Yes, investment audits and what was the title again?
It was external vendor audit of the private equity service provider.
External vendor, private equity. Evaluate the is it evaluate the private equity service providers compliance with specific provisions? Yes, so it's our vendors agreement with compliance with its agreement. That's what it's.
Just with the compliance to the agreement, not how the methodology is being used.
No, it's generally what we do is once there's an agreement in place, we just go out to audit the vendor to ensure that they're in compliance with the contracts agreement.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I would also like to support Ms. Brown's suggestion that we take this up for a discussion item, at least to see if we can agendize the internal audits on a closed session. Hopefully that we can have a discussion about that going forward.
Okay, thank you. It looks like I have a comment or question from Ms. Middleton.
Yes, excuse me. I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but we are going to take Ms. Brown's proposal. I would want to have a full understanding of the workload implications for staff of that type of change.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more requests to speak. Let me just double check this queue. Okay, so it looks like we'll move on to action item 6B.
Mr. Chair, this is Pam. That is an action item, so we will need to take a motion.
We need to take a vote. Okay, so we're taking a vote on 2020 to 2021 Office of Audit Services plan. And so I'll have Ms. Hopper called. Oh, no, do I need a motion and a second to approve? So moved by Ms. Middleton.
Second.
Second by Mr. Ruffino. So I'll call for the question. Ms. Hopper.
Margaret Brown,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
Aye.
Shonda Wesley. Aye. Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, we have 7 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Hopper. So now we'll go on to 6B, Independent Auditor's Annual Plan. And again, I'll call on Ms. Chapui.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Belize Chapui, Office of Audit Services. Agenda item 6B is an action item. Staff is requesting the Risk and Audit Committee to approve the board's independent auditor, BDO's audit plan for the audit of CalPERS' financial statements for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2020. The presentation is to provide the Risk and Audit Committee the opportunity to hear from the independent auditor regarding their approach, objectives, scope, and deliverables for the financial statement audit, and to enable the committee to ask questions. BDO staff are present with me today, and I'll turn it over to them to submit their plan.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Chapui. Let's see, do we have the BDO folks queued up here?
They probably need to be unmuted. They said they're already. adjourn the meeting.
Who am I promoting?
Billy Lee?
Billy Kim?
Billy Kim, thank you.
Okay. Billy, you should be able to turn on your audio and video.
Hello, good morning. Can we also promote Sylvia Mack as well as Keith Hammond and Steve Franklin?
All right, all those folks should be able to turn on their audio and video.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, Chairman, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Billy Kim. I'm the overall BDO engagement leader for the external audit at CalPERS. I'm joined with my colleagues, Steve Franklin, who is an asset management partner that's responsible for assisting me in leading the audit of the investments area. I am also joined by Keith Hammond, who's also the partner, and his role is focused on engagement quality and reviewing the work on top of my review as well. Last but not least, we also have Sylvia Mack, who is an assurance director on our team, and she assists me in leading the overall engagement team on the ground through the audit approach, strategy, and execution. In terms of today, we want to go through our presentation with you, and so we want to go through certain pages and highlight specific items within our presentation. So if we can move to slide 2 of the PowerPoint deck. So this is our the components of our presentation, and we will highlight specific items that touch upon each of these various different areas. So first off, I want to talk about our client service team. That's on slide 4. Can we move to slide 4? Thank you. This is an organizational chart of our team. All of the names shown on this slide represent key leaders as well as key specialists on the BDO audit team. All of them are recurring from the prior year. This will assist us to build off of our knowledge that we've gained from the prior year's audit to continue to focus on improving our focus and efficiency for this year's audit. I also wanted to touch upon scope of services, responsibilities, and independence. Can we move to slide 6? Okay, thank you. The scope of our services is consistent with the prior year and includes performing audit over the financial statements included in the CAFR as of June 30th, 2020 for the 2020 year end, and as well as performing the audits over the GASB 68 and GASB 75 employer allocation schedules. On page 7 and 8 of our presentation, if we can move there, also lays out responsibilities associated with the financial statements and the GASB 68 and 75 schedules. I will highlight a few of these items, but not necessarily read off each of these items since I would assume you have read this in advance. But first off, management is responsible for the preparation and the fair presentation of the financial statements and the schedules in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, while the responsibility of BDO as your auditors is to express an opinion over such financial statements and schedules in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. Also, it's a responsibility of the Risk and Audit Committee to oversee management in their responsibilities as well. Now, if we move on to page 9, is our slide on independence. And this is where I want to reiterate to the committee that our auditors are independent, that we as your auditors are independent of CalPERS, which is a requirement under our professional standards to be so. On page 11 is our timeline for the audit. I want to highlight, as you can see, that we are in touch with management throughout the year. And this is important for us to ensure we are identifying any changes or information we need for the audit on a timely basis, and also for us to provide real-time updates to management on our progress. We are currently in the stages of wrapping up our interim testing this month, and management has so far been very responsive to our requests. And so we have not had any issues having access on obtaining access of any information we have asked for thus far. And even though that we are currently working remotely due to COVID-19. On top of that, as it relates to work being performed so far, we have found no specific issues to report to you as it relates to the work that has been completed. Now I'll pass it off to Sylvia, who will talk about our audit strategy and risks.
Thanks, Billy. And I'm going to, if we could turn to slide 14, I'm going to start with describing some of our audit strategy considerations. As part of our planning process, we have been working to identify areas of focus, and that includes areas of potential misstatement, whether it be to error or fraud, as well as other areas of concern. The way we identify those areas is we consider the prior year results of the audit, as well as performing preliminary analytical reviews. We also consider any changes or developments within the industry, as well as changes in the general economic conditions. We've also thought through areas of judgment and estimates and whether there's any areas there where there's more risk than others. We've also considered the entity's internal controls. So we have performed walkthroughs to gain an understanding of the processes and controls that are in place, and have identified if there's any particular areas of risk that would be of concern to our audit that we'd want to focus our audit procedures on. Slide 15 highlights that even though our planning process was performed as a way to identify areas of risk, this is a continual process. So as we go through the audit, if we identify any other areas of concern, we would focus on that and work to develop audit procedures to address those areas. We will communicate with the Risk and Audit Committee if we see any changes to our planned audit strategy as we progress in our audit. Turning to slide 17, slide 17 summarizes some of our areas of focus. Fraud risk is always one of the areas, as well as the potential for management override. As part of that, we have looked at the control procedures. We've also inquired of various personnel within CalPERS, both within the accounting department as well as outside of the accounting department. And then also we will plan to test journal entries and look for areas of management override on that front. As it relates to the long-term care liability, we will review the actuarial valuation reports as well as any assumptions that go in those reports, and we'll test the roll forward activity and then also test the sample of the underlying census data of the information going into those reports. We'll also focus on the healthcare estimated insurance claims. On that front, we will test a sample of the claims for accuracy. We'll also do a retrospective review to think about whether the IBNR reserve, the incurred but not reported reserves, are accurate and reasonable. We'll also recalculate the amounts as well. On the pension and other post-retirement benefit liability side, we will test a sample of the census data. We'll also use our actuarial specialists to evaluate the reasonableness of the assumptions that are being used to estimate that liability. On the plan contribution side, which is another area of our focus, we'll perform analytical procedures, and for any anomalies identified, we'll focus on those to perform audit procedures on. We'll also select a sample of contributions and perform the calculations to ensure existence and accuracy. Benefit payments is another area of focus. In terms of that, we'll also perform analytical procedures, and we'll perform sample of testing on various benefit payment transactions, and that will include all types of benefit payments, whether it be those related to retirement, death, disability. We'll also look at premium revenues as an area of focus. For that, we'll look at the existence, completeness, and accuracy of those premium revenues, and we'll perform cutoff procedures as well. And then just to highlight, in terms of the information systems, as part of our walkthroughs and understanding of the controls that are in place, we've also looked at the controls in place over the IT systems related to the accounting systems, particularly as it relates to logical access and any change management controls. I'd now like to turn it over to Steve, who will focus on the investment.
Thank you, Sylvia. For investments, our audit approach will be similar to last year. We will perform a risk-based audit approach where we allocate CalPERS portfolio investments into different buckets based on the security's risk profile. We will then perform relevant and appropriate audit procedures for each bucket. For example, for the level 1 and level 2 securities, which include public equities and debt investments, these investments are generally low risk and will be placed in one bucket. Less liquid securities, which are not publicly traded and private, such as private equity investments, real assets, will be put in another bucket due to their higher risk profile. As you may expect, we'll plan to spend a bit more time with the less liquid, higher risk securities. Our procedures will be primarily focused on the existence and valuation assertion for all the investments. For level 1 and level 2 securities, we will send confirmations on a sample basis to custodians such as State Street, Morgan Stanley, Bank of New York, to confirm existence of CalPERS shares. Additionally, we will also validate the price or value of the securities using independent third-party information. For higher risk investments, such as the level 3 ones that I mentioned earlier, we will also send a sample of confirmations to investment managers to validate the existence of CalPERS year-end balances for those investments. Also, we will use the confirmations to verify the valuation used by management as of 6/30, in addition to other valuation procedures that we will do into the confirmation. We plan to place added emphasis on the lag analysis prepared by management this year, given the current economic environment. With that, I will hand it over to my colleague.
Thank you, Steve and Sylvia. I want to reiterate the risk assessment process is a fluid process and is ongoing. So even as we are in execution of our work, that is something that we're continuously assessing whether there's any updates or changes we need to be making as relates to the risk that we should be focusing on. Therefore, if there's any additional risks that that the Risk and Audit Committee also have in mind, that is something we are very open to hearing from you as well for our consideration. Lastly, we do have a couple other slides, some slides on preparing and responding to COVID-19, which are not specific to CalPERS, but are just slides that we have provided to all of our clients on general considerations and recommendations in the back, as well as updates to GASB pronouncement activity as well. So with that, I wanted to just open up the floor for any specific questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kim, Ms. Mack, and Mr. Franklin. And I have a question from Margaret Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Kim, for that presentation. I have a question on the audit area of focus, and I'm looking at fraud risk or fraud inquiries. And what I'm really want you to take a look at is if the reporting is adequate. The reporting that comes back to the board is adequate so that we can provide oversight. I really would like you to take a look at that. My primary concern has always been that we get these little bar graphs that basically just say resolved within a year or unresolved over a year, and there is nothing specific in those in that information. It's just a little graph. And so it's problematic for me as a board member to actually know what those either fraud inquiries or those findings are, and that they're being resolved, or at least that they're being reported to the board. Other than with a little bar graph, we can't actually tell what the issues are. And so I'd like you to take a look at that as part of your audit. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is definitely something as it relates to any findings that are associated with our work over the audit of the financial statements, that we will be inquiring and meeting with various different management across CalPERS. So that includes the internal audit office as well, with Billy Shapui, and just getting an understanding of what the status of relevant findings are associated with the the financial statements as well. And so that is something we will take into consideration and incorporate as part of our review.
Yeah, thank you. And my concern is any um, reports of fraud or any tip line activity. I would just like to make sure that you're following up on that and that the reporting back to the board appears to be adequate in your firm's estimation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I do not see any other requests or questions or comments. And so let's double check the queue. Nope. So this is an action agenda item to approve the independent auditor's annual plan. It's the pleasure of the committee.
I'll move.
Second.
Okay, moved by Mr. Perez, seconded by, was that Ms. Brown?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Ms. Hopper, would you follow the roll for the question?
Margaret Brown,
Aye.
Frank Ruffino for Fiona Ma,
Aye.
Lisa Middleton,
Aye.
Jason Perez,
Aye.
Shonda Wesley,
Aye.
Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, 7 ayes. Jason Perez made the motion. Margaret Brown seconded it.
All right. Okay, well, I will thank Ms. Chapuis and the whole team and Mr. Kim and your team as well. It's been a lot of work and a lot of new challenges with the COVID adventure that we're all embroiled in. So thanks very much for the presentations and the fine work. And we'll move on to item 7, information agenda items. Starting with our status report on enterprise compliance activity, and I'll call on Marlene Timberlake Diadamo.
Good morning again. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Apologies, I had to move because my computer went into battery saver mode. So if my background looks different, that's why. So agenda item 7A is an information item which includes the standing report for monthly compliance activities with the discussion of the personal trading platform we use. Attachments 1 or 2 are the April and May reports. Attachment 3 is supplemental information we are providing regarding the personal trading program. First, I want to note that beginning with this meeting, compliance will provide its enterprise compliance activity report monthly rather than quarterly. Given the change in our meeting schedule, with meeting dates of February, April, June, and November, we needed to adjust our reporting because we meet every other month for the first 6 months and then in November. Our proposal is to shift from quarterly reporting to monthly reporting. And what this means is that reporting will be provided for the period ending roughly 30 to 45 days prior to the committee meeting. The lag is for us to be able to put the reports together and meet the distribution deadlines. For instance, at the next meeting, we will provide monthly reporting for June, July, August, and September as individual attachments. In order to provide you with the information as timely as possible, we will be delivering the completed monthly reports through the Insights tool so that you are receiving the monthly reports roughly 3 to 4 weeks after the completion of the month in question. At this point, I would ask if anyone has any questions on the April and May reports. Each report is about 18 pages, and I will open it up for questions, and then we could move to attachment 3, which is the discussion on the personal trading platform.
Okay, I believe Ms. Brown is the first in the queue with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't always have to go first, so I'll type slower. So I'm on attachment, I want to make sure I'm in the right place. Attachment 7A, item 7A, attachment 1. Is that what we're on?
Right.
Page 3 of 18.
Okay.
So I've circled board and employee form 700 filings because although you give us a little table that says how many are outstanding, they don't appear on the CalPERS transparency website. They used to be on their website, and they're not there. They're from, some are there from 2019, but there's none there for 2020. So, and we don't even have all of them from 2019. So I'm wondering how we can ensure that that gets updated routinely. That those filings, at least of the board members and of the executives. I don't want all the employees on there, but whatever ones we typically did, and I'd like to see those updated and on there.
So
why they're not, or
well, I could go into a couple of sort of maybe get you up to speed on the reporting portion. So page 4 of 18 is the board and employee form 700 filings. And what this page represents is the filings that are due in that particular month. Typically, these are filings that are for new employees, or like in this instance where we had the assuming office. So for purposes of the monthly reporting, we're actually reporting on the forms or the filings that are due for that month. In terms of the transparency page, we actually have annual reporting up for calendar year 2019 for board and Ms. Frost and Mr. Meng. For calendar year 19, that just went up recently. Remember, Ms. Brown, that the annual filings were actually pushed from an April due date to a June 1st due date. So we've gotten those up as soon as we could get them up. For previous years, we don't have filings up for some individuals to the fact that we have accessibility issues and the form is not ours. So what we've done is since the accessibility rule went into effect, we've made the forms available for board members, Ms. Frost and Mr. Meng. So for calendar year 18, we're actually looking into, because you're correct, there are forms that are up for some board members and not others. And so we're looking into how to get the rest of that and make that complete. I hope that answers your question.
right. So can we put them up even though they're not completely accessible, as opposed to putting nothing up at all?
Well, putting them up while they're not completely accessible opens CalPERS up to some level of risk, and perhaps Mr. Jacobs could opine, but the decision that was made regarding the accessibility is to put up at least the board and Ms. Frost and Mr. Meng. And those.
I would suggest we try to get those up and accessible sooner rather than later. That's my comment on that. And then are we going to go into personal trade monitoring later, or is this part of this section on page 6 of 18?
So we can go into 6 right now for April if you'd like. We also have the attachment 3 is dedicated to personal trading platform. But if you have specific questions around what happened in April or May or prior, then we can discuss that now.
Even going back, so let's take a look at page 6 of 18, if we could put that up. And my concern is, I think as a committee, or at least as me, as one member, I kind of didn't take enough care when I looked at these. Are you going back to May of 2019, there's 5, and then in June there's 4, and then in July there's 6. And I think that's way too many. I think 1 is way too many. And I really have concerns that we have so many. So I like September of 19, there's none. That's great. In October there's 1. But I just really think we need to focus on this insider trading, or not, I'm sorry, we don't call it insider trading anymore, but personal trading violations, and really get focused on this and get this down. So I assume the rest of the board feels the same way, but let me go on to my next question, which is on, so I looked at, and then I want to go on to page 8.
And just one moment, Ms. Brown. Chair Miller, Ms. Marlene, Ms. Timberlake Diadamo does have a prepared presentation that may address Ms. Brown's questions around process, education, transparency, monitoring, consequences. She may be able to get into some details for the presentation that she has ready for the committee.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. I just don't think I looked that closely at those violations until we had that huge balloon in March, and then of course it draws your attention to it, and then now I'm focused on it. I want to move to page 8 of 18, which is the ethics helpline complaints received, and this is kind of my comment to the BDO auditors, which is looking at these ethics.
It won't come through the.
When looking at these ethics complaints, I see we don't get a synopsis of these complaints other than their retirement benefit abuses. I'd like us to see as a committee, and if it needs to be in closed session, I'm fine with that. But like the information security and records, if those have complaints, I'd like to get a synopsis of those. And then there you have at the bottom, there's a note, Marlene, at the bottom that says 4 non-ethics related complaints were received during the reporting period that are not represented in the above graph. So can you, without specifying exactly what those are, can you kind of tell me what those are?
Sure, I can give you examples.
Okay.
So sometimes folks call into the ethics helpline with complaints that are not ethics related. It might be that, sorry, Anthony, you took too long to answer a call on the call center, or I was frustrated because something didn't happen, or I've been trying to get something done. So they're not ethics related, but they come in through the ethics helpline. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we acknowledge that we receive them, and that's why there's a footnote there, but then we refer them to the proper individual that can help resolve that matter.
Okay. So it's not employees complaining about their parking space. No. Okay. Not on the hotline. Okay. And then can we go to page 10 of 18?
Yes.
And so of course, my concerns, what was my concerns with? So there's no purple, looking at this chart, which is information security and records, but I just want to find out what happens with sort of these, or business integrity and conflicts of interest. So there looks like there was one in December of 19. I just want to make sure I'm reading this chart correctly. When I look at the green, sort of that teal colored bar, I don't know what color it is on your computer, that green colored bar. That's accounting, auditing, and financial controls. So, but it doesn't actually tell me what the complaint was or how it was resolved. And so I'm just wondering if we could get a little synopsis of those, or if they're being investigated, what's happening with those.
So let me sort of explain to you what pages 8 and 10 do. Page 8 is essentially an accounting of the ethics helpline complaints that are received by category. And so what that looks like is there's 6 categories that we use, and each ethics helpline complaint that comes in is categorized into one of those 6 areas, and then is essentially set out for investigation, and then we report on the findings. That's what slide 10 does. So slide 10 talks about ethics complaints that have been closed, and we break those out into either substantiated complaints or unsubstantiated complaints. And so what you're seeing in the bottom left-hand quarter, where you refer to the teal bar, would be substantiated complaints, and the teal would be an accounting, auditor, and financial controls complaint that had been substantiated in December of 2019.
So I would like to know what that complaint is. I don't need to know about the unsubstantiated complaints. I'd like to know about the substantiated complaints, not about retirement benefits fraud, but more about business integrity and conflicts, information security and records, and accounting, auditing, and financial controls. I would like to know what those substantiated complaints are without necessarily naming the employee, because I know there are HR issues, but I would like to know what those are. I don't know if any other board member wants to know, but I think when complaints are substantiated, because the majority of these are unsubstantiated and closed, but the ones that are substantiated, I'd like to know what those are as someone who's responsible for oversight. Let me see if I have any other questions about. And so I don't know how you would do that. I call it a synopsis of the substantiated complaints. I don't know what you want to call that. And I don't think it'd be a lot of work because a lot of them aren't substantiated. I mean, there's very few when you look at this chart. But I think the board would want to know what's going on with these complaints. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I have Mr. Ruffino with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a comment, but he may be addressed later during your presentation, and if it is, I can wait. But if you can pull the slide, it's item 5E, attachment 3, page 606. It's got a chart that shows the total transaction versus transaction causing a violation. My observation and the question is, as I see it, 2015 and 2016, there seemed to be 3.8% and 3.9%. And then, are we getting the slide?
She's getting
There
there.
you go, perfect.
Okay.
This might be easier to follow. So if you could see 2015, 2016, and then 3.9 in 2016, then it's going down 2017, 2018, and 2019 is decreases, and then in 2020 we have a spike again to 2.9%. And my observation or my question is, do we know what cause? Is there a trend there, that spike? Thank you.
So, thank you for the question. We do know what caused the spike in 2020. This was during the time of the market volatility that occurred in middle of February through March of this year, where the market was extremely volatile. And as a result of that, we had experienced a significant amount of violations by our covered persons than what we're normally used to, which is evidenced by this chart. In terms of the significance of the spike, we did have a covered person who had more than a proportionate amount of trades. And so I would say that a lot of this is due to an individual, and we are addressing that as well as with others in terms of the reporting. And when I say that, what I say is when we reported on this, we had reported that there was approximately 10 individuals that had violations during that period, during the quarter, one of which had a disproportionate amount of the violations.
Thank you for that. Do you happen to know out of those personal trading violations types, was the majority like missing pre-clearance or restricted list? Do you know what the majority were? What types?
Yeah, so the way that, and we're sort of skipping around in my presentation, but the way that the personal trading program works is that a pre-clearance basically forms the first level, if you will, of a violation. And then what happens is we have holding period and we have blackout and restricted list violations as well. So the most violations that are going to occur because of the way that I describe pre-clearance being the first level are going to be pre-clearance violations. And then what happens is if someone has held something for less than 30 days, they would also get a holding period violation, or if they had done their trade and hadn't pre-cleared it during the blackout period, which is noted as the day before, the day of, and the day after we trade, then they would also get a blackout period violation. So to answer your question, most of them are pre-clearance, but I don't have the percentage.
Yeah, this is
Thank you.
Chair. I've got Ms. Paquin in the queue, but I would ask if the question is about the material at the committee, your presentation, perhaps we could hold them, and so until you've actually done the presentation. So, Ms. Paquin.
Yes, it is about the presentation, so I'm happy to hold until the end. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead with continue the presentation, Ms. Diadamo. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to skip then up to page 3 of the presentation that you're currently on. So this is a history of the personal trading regulation. It was enacted in 2012, and the regulations reinforce various state and securities laws. They protect covered persons, the fund, and supports our fiduciary duty. The regulations were amended in October of 2019 to better align with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission's guidance as it pertains to personal trading. The biggest impact from the 2019 revision of the regulations was to include exchange-traded funds as covered securities. Next slide, please. And okay, so what I wanted to do with this slide was to give you a feel for what we do with respect to the management and the administration of the personal trading program. What we have here is a slide that outlines the communications, training, and education that we implement when it comes to the administration of the program. We start with onboarding, and in onboarding, when a new covered person team member begins at CalPERS, they are trained on the regulation and how to navigate the system that we use for monitoring transactions. This training can take the place of group training or individual training. We also offer training to spouses and domestic partners. And really what we're doing is our regulation actually requires that it's not only our covered person, but their spouse, particularly, that's also a covered person. And so we provide training, and we provide those individuals an ability to come in and get firsthand training from us on, what our regulations require, as well as how to navigate the system. This training can also be an opportunity for the covered person to go over their specific situation and get information regarding how to stay within the requirements of the regulation. And so what I've pointed out here on online personal trading and the ongoing communications are the resources that we have available to covered persons if they have a question or if they need some help in either executing a trade or navigating the system. Our regulation is actually available online, and it's also available on the intranet. We have an FAQ presentation that is also available online, and we have contact information for live help. We have a team of individuals that are available from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday for live telephone help as well as email help. We also have our personal trading deck overview, which is also available to individuals. It's a detailed 29-page presentation that is intended to be a self-guided document to cover all aspects of the personal trading rules and requirements and navigating the personal trading platform. Key topics are purpose, the regulations, pre-clearing, navigating the Schwab CT system, and attestations and affirmations. And then we also have a quick reference guide, which is a short 3-page, but more detailed guide on how to navigate the personal trading platform. In terms of ongoing communication and training, we have a team of 3 individuals who are dedicated to our investment compliance area. With respect to personal trading, these individuals serve as the primary contact with our covered persons. This is an area where I believe we spend a lot of time and for good reason. It's important to make sure that we're following the regulations, that people are being monitored who should be monitored, and that personal training violations are dealt with. At this point, take any questions if there are. Move to the next slide about the training.
Yes, they had hope on the training. Okay. Hard for me to tell whether the questions I have in the queue were on that specific portion.
I can move to 5 and 6 and then
Yeah,
take questions.
let's just,
That's okay.
let's take the
Okay.
questions after we get through the presentation, and then it won't result in further confusion on my part. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. So actually, in terms of, there was and can you go back to slide 4? I'm sorry. I just wanted to note. I wanted to highlight some of the trainings that were done as a result of the personal training regulation, the change. We had group onboarding training, which occurs monthly, which I alluded to. We also do frequent email reminders to covered persons regarding the rules and attestations. We also did annual compliance training this past year in November of 2019. And then we also did separate sessions for covered persons for information regarding the changes to the reg. We did annual personal training attestation, and this requirement is reported to the committee. It's due April 1st, and it's an attestation provided by covered persons that they understand the regs and that they have disclosed their reportable accounts. Trainings, we do trainings that are conducted in coordination with the amendment, and we did trainings in October or August, September, and October of 2019. In that instance, we provided 5 trainings per month. It says five trainings per month, and that we had additional team meetings where our members of our compliance team went and spoke to team meetings to talk to them about the changes that occurred in the regulation. So that I just wanted to provide that additional information on communications, training, and education. If we want, we can move to the next slide, which would be the treatment of violations. And here, what I wanted to highlight is that enterprise compliance conducts a review when a potential violation occurs. We actually, on a daily basis, perform the review of the alerts that we receive. And if a violation is deemed to have occurred, a violation notice is issued to the covered person. Violations are reported to management. In the terms of the treatment of violations, it's there are several scenarios. I'm on bullet 2. There are several scenarios for the treatment of violations, depending on the specific violation circumstance. These include follow-up training, management notification, and discipline. And then the bullet indicates that human resources is notified of violations, and we work very closely with human resources and our legal department when addressing violations. We have implemented an alignment with the progressive discipline process as well. So we are tracking violations that keep in accordance with the progressive discipline. The third bullet, transaction and violation information is provided to senior leaders and is reported to this committee in open session. Management receives periodic updates on activities. In terms of the discipline, I wanted to note that we do exist within the civil service framework. And as such, team members have rights through the progressive discipline process, which I noted just a minute or so ago. We follow and we believe in applying those protections. I had noted in 2018, we worked with HR to align our reporting with progressive discipline, and that we do report violations to senior leaders as well as this risk and audit committee. At that point, I'll move to slide 6, where we started touching on a little bit. And really the point that I wanted to make in including this slide was to show that over the years, particularly most recently the past 3 years, barring our experience in 2020, we have been successful in making sure that covered persons are having less violations. And when I say we've been successful, I really believe that preventing violations is super important. And we try to do that in ways that are around education, training, visibility, putting resources out there, really giving covered persons every opportunity to ask a question, connect with us, and find out if they're having an issue with the system or if there's something that they don't understand, that they can get the answers to those questions. And so I look at our experiences in 2017, 2018, and 2019 as really being indicative of the efforts that we've been putting forth. 2020 is disappointing. It's disappointing to me too. I don't think that we should have violations as well. I understand that we're humans, and with 473 covered persons, from time to time, we might have someone make a mistake. The important thing for us is to make sure that we're getting to those people, we're understanding what's happening, and we're making sure that they're thoroughly trained on the system, on the regulations, and that we can help them not make mistakes in the future. So that's the end of this presentation. I would be happy to take any questions. I'm sure there will be some.
Okay, I have several people in the queue, and I just want to make a quick comment before I get to them that I think 2020, when I look at data and when I, in my briefings and my discussions with Ms. Diadamo and staff, it seems pretty clear that 2020 was not a common cause kind of aberration in the data. There were some special causes there. There were the COVID thing was not your typical day-to-day working environment, and I think that that's something to be noted. But that our system of controls and checks and trainings and procedures, it really did exactly what it was supposed to do. And that's why we have this information and the actions taken and the lessons we're learning from it in front of us. So I had Ms. Paquin next, followed by Ms. Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Diadamo Timberlake, for the presentation. I think it was very interesting and enlightening. And I had a question, two questions for you actually. And the first is that when I look at attachment 2 on page 6 of attachment 2, it lists out violations for both April and May, and we have in each month another 12 violations listed there, which is quite a bit lower than the 127 in April. And I guess my question is, are these 12 individuals with these violations, or is this a smaller number of people committing multiple violations?
Yes, it's a smaller number of people that have several violations. And remember, I'm just trying to remember, there's the pre-clearance. And I think we actually, you said April, right? Just gonna
April and May. It's on attachment
Right.
2, page 6.
Right, okay. So for page 6 of April, okay. I'm sorry, you're in 2. I was just looking at the categories because in our reporting, we actually list the categories of violations. And so for April and May, it looks like they're all purple. So they were all missing pre-clearances. And so these were 3 individuals, and it says in the observations that there were 12 violations committed by 3 covered persons in May. And then in April, if we went to the April report, it would say, I believe there was also 3 covered persons in April as well. So it is not, it's not 12 people, it's 3 people that traded multiple securities. And so the way that the pre-clearance works is that the violation occurs for each security. So it's not just if you traded 5 securities and you forgot to pre-clear them all, it would be 5.
Okay. And, I do want to commend staff on the outreach and the training, and as board members or delegates for board members, we do receive your annual emails and your regular email updates reminding us that this is required and how to do it. We get emails when your system is going to be down for weekend for maintenance. So I feel that, staff is doing a good job of reaching out. So the question I have is, how do you think the board, this committee, can help impress upon staff that we do take this seriously and this is important? And even when the markets, maybe especially when the markets are volatile due to COVID, you can't circumvent the personal trading requirements.
Well, I think you just have. But I agree. We do this. We impress upon folks the importance of this. And one of the things that we do to really get people's attention is that we report up these violations. And we've been doing that for a while. And I believe that that's part of the reason why we are seeing the reduction in the number of violations, because we do take it seriously and we want it addressed. And so I think talking about it like we are now is a way to make sure that people understand that this is serious, and that when violations occur, we really make sure that we understand why. We make sure that the person is trained. And if there are other issues that are around that violation, we address them as well, working with our HR and our legal partners.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Middleton.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I get into my questions, is Ms. Wesley participating in this? And if she is, I want to ask Mr. Jacobs a question regarding my ability to ask questions that deal with the broad range of progressive discipline practices and policies.
Is he here?
I'm not sure.
He's muted.
I mean, as long as it doesn't mention an actual employer case, I think it's okay. But
yes.
let's see.
That is a correct statement. And we would not go into specific cases in open session.
That same thought came into my head, Lisa, when I was listening.
I want to be careful here.
Yeah, I so appreciate it.
So,
if we want to be cautious, I can log off.
I don't think you need to, knowing where I'm going with my questions, but I will be very careful as I move forward. Marlene, could you walk us through the steps that you have taken from an audit standpoint to satisfy yourself that you are catching anyone who would be making a violation of our trading policies?
Okay, so we have, when someone is onboarded, we determine their classification, whether or not they're a covered person. So at the first instance, the decision is made whether or not the person is a covered person. If the person is a covered person, then they are required to disclose their reportable accounts. And where we can, and we do in most circumstances, we actually put them on an electronic feed. So for the vast majority of our covered persons, we are receiving a daily feed of the trades that are occurring in their accounts. And so when I alluded to earlier a few minutes ago about the review of the alerts that we do on a daily basis, that is what we are doing. Our personal trading staff come in and they first order of business is to review the alerts. And then from the reviewing the alerts, they determine whether or not a violation occurs. And sometimes it requires some communication with the covered person to see what the situation was or what was going on. So the first thing we do is we require people to disclose their accounts, and they actually attest that they have disclosed all of their reportable accounts. And we actually have them do that on a quarterly basis as well. So folks every quarter are attesting that they understand the regs and that they have disclosed all of their accounts. And then there are folks that don't have reportable, I should say, don't have electronic accounts. And for what they do is they actually have to submit every quarter their statements. And then we review those statements and we review them for violations as well. So we are essentially having folks disclose their reportable accounts, attest that they've disclosed reportable accounts, and we're reviewing their reportable accounts either through the electronic system or manually when they submit it to us every quarter. And in fact, report on that to this committee on a quarterly basis. Now it will be monthly.
All right. What concerns you have of individuals not disclosing to you an account that they have opened?
What concerns do I have?
What processes do you have to detect someone not a non-disclosure of an account?
So right now we are and have been relying on the attestations of the individuals. I would say that failing to do so or doing so incorrectly would be a violation of our policies and would probably submit them to some level of discipline. We have a lot of mechanisms to handle that, but at this level, it really is, everybody understands that this is a requirement and they attest on a regular basis that they've done so.
Okay. Then when progressive discipline is necessary, can you describe the broad process that you go through in making a determination as to what level of discipline is appropriate? And I believe it is ultimately your authority to make that determination. So can you talk about the authority that you have to impose discipline?
So as I mentioned, we work closely with our partners in terms of, documentation, finalizing, decisioning, yes. And so for me, what I rely on is the severity of the violation, the history of the covered person. We track all of this information for covered persons. And so if we have a covered person whom, maybe has experienced more violations than I think ought to, that comes into play in terms of figuring out what the discipline is. At the end of the day, as we've said, we take this very seriously, and it is incumbent upon individuals that are covered persons to be within the regulations at all times. And so a violation of our regulations is a serious matter, and it is one that requires the right amount and the appropriate level of discipline.
And are you satisfied that you have all the resources that you need to address this area?
Yes, I would say that everyone is very strong on this particular item. And there is, I don't believe that there's anything that if I ask for, that I wouldn't be able to get, because everybody agrees that this is a matter that needs to be, that we need to be, as close to as perfect as we can.
Thank you. I'm going to close with two comments. One, as Ms. Paquin said, I want to compliment you and your team for the process that you have put forward. I think this is extremely serious, and I'm very pleased by what I hear. Beyond that, and this is much more a policy question that I would like us perhaps either in this committee or in the governance committee to address at some point in the future, as to whether or not there should be some restrictions on the ability of our employees who are involved in investing on behalf of CalPERS to make investments of their own. And I'll leave that discussion for later, but hopefully we can set it at some point in time in the appropriate committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question from Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to 7A attachment 2, page 6. Mr. Adama, when you told us that the observations were each covered person attempted to pre-clear their transactions, which is great, but made an error in the process, which resulted in the violations. So let me ask a question because I don't trade. Um, do they not know there was an error in the process? I mean, and they shouldn't have traded, or did they just trade anyways? Or do we know that?
So we know that I just have to find my notes. So for instance, um, in one instance, an individual pre-cleared, and I'm just going to try to get my notes.
I want to make sure we're not being too specific, but normally you would know if but this is generically, you would know if your transaction that you want to make pre-cleared, right? You would know if it didn't go through. Is that true?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay.
And I'll explain why. So for instance, an individual could pre-clear the wrong security. They could put a different ticker symbol in than what they actually clear. It happens, and it's something that would trigger a pre-clearance violation. Now, we would be able to go in and see that an individual actually pre-cleared something else at that time, and that's where the conversation comes in with the covered person. Once we get the alert, that they would say, no, I pre-cleared it, and then we would go back and say, no, actually you pre-cleared this other thing, and since you didn't do the thing that you actually traded, you are assessed a violation.
Okay. And then the other question I had asked this of the committee chair in talking about the restricted list. So it looks like we never have any violations on the restricted list. And I had asked for either a copy of the restricted list, or how do we know what the restricted list is or what's on the restricted list?
When you say, how do we know?
How do you, let's say, because, well, I asked for a copy, what's on the restricted list or how does it get made? And I got no response.
So the restricted list is actually coded into our system, and that's how we would be able to know if someone were to try to do a transaction, that it would come up as a restricted list and the pre-clearance would be denied. And if they had done a transaction of a restricted list security, they would be assessed a violation, and it would be reported in the reporting that you see in front of you.
Okay, and then as a last question, sort of humorous, but maybe not. Were any of the violations in March, April, or May have to do with spouses or significant others? You know?
Yes. Oh. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Maybe
yes.
Maybe counseling them will offer as well. I don't know.
And we do. We actually have counseled spouses. We've had spouses come in for education and training. We've done it over the phone. If we have a spouse that has a violation and the covered person doesn't, the spouse wants to, maybe the spouse is the person that does the trading in the family, we absolutely have that person come in and provide them with the same level of training that we would provide a covered person. And I would say, for me, it's not humorous, but because I take this really seriously too. But we do have spouses that trigger violations as well, and we do our very best to make sure they're trained.
Great. I was thinking more marital counseling, but okay, thank you.
Well, we do that.
Probably outside our scope. All right, thank you.
We don't do that. I will note, to your point about May, Ms. Brown, that it is heartening, even though it's disappointing that we did experience transactions in May, that at least the individuals did attempt to pre-clear. So we're imparting upon people the importance of pre-clearance and how pre-clearance protects them and us. I will note that beginning next month, we are stepping up our training for covered persons, and we're making sure that we're going out to folks to clear up any misinterpretations or any miseducation that folks may have in the personal trading process or the regulations.
Thank you. I do like the idea that we use training first, and then we use HR if we can't get them to understand the importance of not making trades that aren't correct. Yeah, I believe our goal is 0. Our goal is January of 2020, right? I mean, that's our goal. Nothing on this list. Is that correct?
Our goal is to have as few violations as possible. I would love it to be 0. I would love every month to be 0. As I said before, having 473 individuals and their spouses as covered persons, we have to be realistic, but that's where the training and the education comes in. If we can do a really good job there, we can hopefully get that to 0.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But Marlene, our goal is 0. I think the only point, Marlene, you could add is on these pre-clearance violations, I believe a couple of these violations were related to the expiration of the pre-clearance. So maybe you could talk about that quickly.
Yeah, so in one of these, so as I had indicated in May, everyone had tried to pre-clear. In one instance, an individual had done a pre-clearance, but then the pre-clearance had occurred prior to the end of the market session, and the individual had traded after the market had closed, which was still on the same day as when they had pre-cleared, but it was essentially after the session had finished. And so our regulations actually says that when you do a trade or when you get a pre-clearance before the market closes, but you don't trade until after, you actually have to pre-clear again. And the reason for that is that our system is coded for when the fund is going to be making trades. So it's important to make sure that you pre-clear on the day that the fund is actually making the trade. And so that was some of those pre-clearance violations that we saw in May.
Okay, I have a question from Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Marlene, I was just wondering if the profile of the violators, does it represent normally newer employees, or is just all over the map, newer and senior?
I would say that the profile, there really isn't, that I can think of, a profile that says this is a typical violator. Sometimes we have newer employees would have a violation. Sometimes we have employees that have been here for, but maybe aren't, as familiar with the trades. A lot of times we have employees that don't trade very often. And so that's where the education and the visibility comes in, because you have employees maybe that don't trade very often, that somehow, in the process, whether it's the pre-clearance or interpreting the regulations, get it wrong. So I can't say that there's sort of, one profile of a violator. It really depends. We have it at different levels, but the important thing to note is that we are making sure that we are impressing upon people the importance of pre-clearance, and pre-clearance solves a lot of problems when pre-clearance occurs the right way. And so that's what we're going to be educating folks on. And I just wanted to go back a little bit. Ms. Frost is correct. Our goal is 0. I want to be strong about that. I don't want to sort of hedge, understanding that we're going to do everything that we can to try to get that number down to 0 on a consistent basis.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. And, I find this overall to be actually a quite encouraging story. It really seems to me to demonstrate that our systems, our controls, the fine work of our team are effective, and we're catching these things. And while we want 0, even these kind of human errors that can lead to violations, that when I look at that blip, when we're down, when we've trended down to such a low level of violations, even the most, even those that are just due to an error in reporting or timing, and then we have that little surge up, which was primarily attributable, the vast majority, to one individual. To me, it just demonstrates that what we're doing and what the team's doing is working. And even in that highly volatile time when things were going kind of haywire with the markets and people who were trading in that environment as well. Seems like a good example of the hard work has paid off in terms of our systems doing what they're supposed to and working. And as a committee, we have this in front of us to be able to see what's going on and know that we're taking actions. So I'll turn it back to you, Ms. Diadamo, for our next item, if that's the end of that one.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I appreciate that. And as I've said a couple of times, this is an area that we take very seriously, and we will continuously work with individuals and management to keep those numbers down and to zero. And you'll have an opportunity every time we meet to ask me questions about this. So I look forward to those conversations. So I'll move to item 7B, if that's okay. And this item is the annual compliance report. This item is something that we do every year. This report highlights activities and accomplishments for the fiscal year ending June 30 of 2020. It documents the Ethics and Compliance Program Initiative highlights, and the report features activities that have been completed in support of CalPERS 5-year compliance plan. The integrated assurance model incorporates governance, risk, practices as a multifaceted approach to promote compliance awareness and accountability. The model centers on the 3 lines of defense framework, which promotes collaboration and increased understanding of roles and responsibilities. At this point, I'll ask if anyone has any questions about this document.
I'm not seeing any here.
Okay. This is an information item, so this would be the end of our the end of our session. In terms of 7B.
Okay, and go to summary of committee direction, and then I believe I do have at least one or more public comments after that.
Okay. I do have a question on the summary of committee direction. Did you want to discuss the request from Ms. Brown to have additional information about substantiated complaints?
Yeah, I would like us to perhaps have some discussion about that and put that into our next closed session for discussion, if that suits. Would that work for the committee, Ms. Brown?
Yes, my mic is on. Okay. I actually was going through because I thought I had seen these before. And so in November 14, 2017, they're there. So if you look at that report, the quarterly status report, they're in there. There's a little chart, a little table, and I can, I'm sure you can look this up, Ms. Diadamo, but it's in there. The Ethics Helpline Summary of Closed Substantiated Complaints. There actually is a table. We used to report it that way. I don't know why we don't anymore. So I hope that's helpful. And it's from November of 2017 was when it went to the Risk and Audit Committee. So this is before I was on the board. But they were there before, and maybe we can just put those on the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other than that discussion, I didn't take any other direction.
Okay. So we'll move on to public comment. And Mr. Falk, we have someone queued up for public comment on item 7D, public comment.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have one person for public comment, Mr. Jerry Fontaine from California State Retirees.
Good morning. This is Jerry Fontaine speaking. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, but at this point in time, I have no questions for the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that concludes public comment for this committee.
Okay, we'll adjourn now into closed session for items 1 to 3 from the closed session agenda. And so at this time, the board members will exit this open session meeting and connect to the closed session meeting. To the members of the public watching on the live stream, the next open session meeting will be the Board Governance Committee. That meeting is scheduled to convene at 9 a.m. Thank you to all the CalPERS team members and fine work. Thanks, board members, and we'll see you in closed session in a few, let's see, 9:40. Why don't we say, yeah, let's just, let's say 10 o'clock. That'll give us time to have a quick break and get all the electronic stuff working again. So closed session at 10 a.m. Okay, we're adjourned.